You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Yariv Adan, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Yariv, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm thrilled to have you on the show today, and just welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, great to be here.
So, Yariv, just jumping straight into it, right? I've previously said that prompting LLMs is not done by natural language, as everyone's saying all the time, but it seems more to be chaotic code because there's so many rules to follow to get a good prompt result. Would you agree to this?
Um, I think there are multiple dimensions here. To me, if to be like, super precise, chaotic means that small changes in the input result in very large changes in the output and often in a non-local manner. And I think so in one way, they're even worse than chaotic. They're unpredictable, right? So the
Mm,
exact same input without any change may result in different output. But I think like the more interesting question is about kind from a pragmatic point of view, and I would split that into two. One, in the consumer context, can the average human being use prompting to consume high quality services, summarizing, ideating, question answering, content generation, all of that in a way that is reliable, useful, and these kind of things that before required someone writing code and not know? I think the answer is definitely yes. The person can quickly iterate to modify the prompt. It can actually understand, people can understand easily what's going on and adjust it. So I think for many useful cases, especially from a consumer perspective, it's useful and not chaotic and is natural language in the sense that you don't need to know any coding. Honestly, you just need a little bit of self-confidence to try and play with it, and also the learning curve is much easier than coding.
mm,
But I think if you go to kind of developer land where people are trying now to build complex apps and complex flows with the prompts as part of that, I do think that these systems definitely, at least at the moment, show some characteristics of chaotism. And even before you change the model, like even the same model, just a different checkpoint, or you small punctuation or small changes in the prompt, um, definitely creates a big change and can actually fail
mm,
the product or the technology. But also here I think people are finding not solutions but workarounds, kind of chain of x, chain of thought, so many reflections. So basically asking the model to look at the answer, reflect, and make a better answer, setting temperature to zero, using grounding APIs. A- And I also think that since people notice that this is actually a bit chaotic at the moment for complex use cases, I think that there are all sorts of interesting use cases that are more tolerant to chaos in a way,
mm,
and also UI solutions that are less sensitive to it. I can give you one example that I really like. First, I saw it like in Pythagora.ai. It's kind of a dev agent, and what they did is they actually defined different agents with different roles in the process to generate code. So the first one is kind of a requirement generation. You tell it, very high level, hey, I want to create a requirement doc for an app that
mm,
is used for people to create their own podcast. And that creates a requirement doc, but then it allows you to edit it. And the next one is kind of an architecture, an architect to create the architecture. But again, every time in the process, the developer, the designer, the tester, the implementer, you get the output that the human gets to fix the output. So I think that again, it doesn't solve the problem, it doesn't solve it technically, but there is a UI solution to it. So I think like manage chaos, I think we can kind of agree somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, the idea that we one intern might not fix everything, but if we have 100 of them, well, chances are we're going to get a good product, right, in the
Yeah.
end at some point. But it still makes it really difficult, I think, from an IT perspective, and you touched upon that, right, with versioning, and I know a lot of the GSIs have made switchboards for models, right? But can
Yes.
you even switch a model because
Yeah.
everything you build is so specific to each model?
But to be honest, so I'm like 200 years old, and we had the same back in the days when we were tempted to use third-party libraries or open source libraries that are kind of changing under your legs.
Yeah.
But then you learn to kind of put it on the side, manage it differently. You don't immediately integrate the changes. You have kind of a change process. You do integration and regression tests. I think the same will happen here, although the matrix is a bit trickier, but also the models are much more helpful in running these tests. So I think it's like interesting times of new technology that is still very young and raw.
But you actually touched upon something that I've been asking other people on the podcast about as well, and also been looking for. Operations. How we don't even know how to operate these things. It's been out for 1.5 years, right? And when other technologies came out, there's been something that resembled it a little bit. We're putting this into business operations so quickly. With RPA, for instance, people have been doing things that looked like it for 30, 40 years. So we had an idea of what could hit us, but no one really knows how we're going to maintain this down the road, right? And what do you say about that?
Yeah, so I think like definitely as an investor, I've seen quite a few startups that are getting into the Gen AI dev process and the application management. So once it's in production, how do you manage it? I haven't seen yet a full solution. I think still it's very manual. I think
Mm,
one critical elephant in the room is how do you run evals for non-trivial tasks. So we know how to run eval for atomic tasks, summarization, translation, something like that. But when it's like kind of a dialogue or more complex, code generation and other, the, running the eval to recognize whether this is good, bad, better, or worse is a critical point in running any integration or regression test. I
mm,
think some of the companies are taking the approach to kind of separate the Gen AI special pieces, like the things that the prompt, the instability of the model, from the logic that is supposed to be kind of regular programming. But I think that again is still challenging. So I haven't seen yet a clear solution, and I think this is one of the reasons why we aren't yet seeing Gen AI for complex use cases yet deployed in production at scale, though we are seeing Gen AI, for simpler atomic use cases where you can do that, with existing paradigms.
yeah, so I think Nosobina in one of the early episodes called it an unreliable computer, and Kurt Kegel said we've created lying machines. He said so that can make stories. He said Kurt
Yeah,
Kegel,
yes.
and,
Although
and
having been building, complex technologies, you know, if you refer to the kind of requirement or even sometime the comments in the code as truth, people are also lying machines. There are so many
yeah,
bugs, and the complexity is also chaotic, right? Like any project has like tens of thousands of p1, p2, p3 that will never be fixed because the p zeros are taking all the attention. So I think like it's not something new. It's like a new flavor. It's a twist on the complexity in programming, and I think we took the complexity from generating to maybe maintaining more, but the complexity was always there when you look at real application in productions.
but there's some funny things here, right? Just separating the structured code, the predictable code, and now these unpredictable machines. And I also I also said before that we used to make people work more predictable, so they could be automated. But now we made an unpredictable machine to sort of mimic the unpredictability of humans, right? To some extent. So you've added these unpredictable
Yeah,
developers into you
yeah.
made a machine to be that.
Although again, I worked in so many places where there's like code in COBOL from 30 years ago that no one touches because they don't know it more, or
No.
18,000 long function in C because that was before kind of good design patterns were introduced, or someone did some super complex algorithm. But left the company and no one is like everyone is afraid to touch it, right? This is kind of So I think these as well have actually many of the characteristics, and we should look at how did we solve this eventually, and think about how do we deal with this kind of programmer that writes
Mhm.
code in differently than we do. Yeah,
Yeah, but the LLMs can code COBOL, right? So maybe they fix that
yeah.
problem for us, right? That's
Actually,
another
there
thing.
are people, yeah, that are using it to convert old code to finally to Java and other stuff. Yeah,
But I just, all of these, for instance, in the medical industry, they have a lot of regulations, so they can't. I remember the trouble just of getting simple automations into production because they had to be tested over and over and over again.
yeah,
But in this case, we can't even. It's like testing it. It's like saying, okay, I need to be very sure that this particle is gonna escape the nuclei right now, right? And you never know because
yeah,
it's stochastic. So there's something there. The predictability is maybe on a large scale, but much more difficult when you have small, one
yeah,
agent.
yeah,
But I've also said previously that we should assume we won't have bigger models than GPT-4 size models, right? Because I like to say things that are falsifiable in the hype
yeah.
market,
I like
because
that
that
you
means
do
that
that.
you can prove me wrong, and that's good. But that also means that we can work with something now, right? Where do you think the development of generative AI models are heading? Bigger, faster, both, or will bigger be bigger context? What do you think?
So first, I will tell you never say never. I think unless we hit some physical limit, and I think we're far from it, my bet is that there would always be a bigger model.
Mm,
And I think we're way too early in the process to say there won't be bigger model or conclude which dimension is the most important one. Because, like, let's remind ourselves that we're only in the second generation of the workable Gen AI models, kind of, ChatGPT 3 to ChatGPT 4. We're in the first generation of the multimodal models.
yeah.
We're in the first generation of long context model. We're first generation in video generation model. We haven't yet even got to the models for autonomous agents in the real world. So I think, like, it's too early in that sense. But I think there is a bunch of related things worth touching. I think first the role of the model has changed and the motivation for the architecture has changed, right? And also, like, the fact that you have a giant model doesn't mean you necessarily use it in inference time. You might use it as a teacher model to distill or fine tune smaller model, right? So maybe, like, actually it's worthwhile to have this, like, super super large model, but you don't necessarily use it in inference, right? That the kind of changes the
Mm,
equations. I think we're also seeing that even when you use the model in production, you don't necessarily use all of it. You tokenize it, you use a subset of experts, subset of layers, subset of paths, right?
mm,
And I think also that the ability to use synthetic data in training that is only, like, kind of touched, is also a big factor in this question. I also, I think, like, we need to remember that the kind of that the size of the model is not a goal, of course, right? It's kind of dictated by the scaling laws, but these are also changing, and it's good to remind ourselves what are these scaling laws, right? So the original insight was that as models get better with more parameters and more data, they perform better. So basically, kind of, there
yeah.
is, like, big motivation to create a bigger model, but they also require more data and more computing for training, which means they're, like, more expensive. And OpenAI came with the first scaling law, and then DeepMind corrected them and basically plotted, like, for a given compute budget, how much data and, what model size are required to achieve the best result, and then you could kind of choose your preferred size based on the budget that you have, right? And basically they found out, by the way, that a smaller model but trained more can achieve better result, right? So this is kind of what you said.
Mhm.
But this was, by the way, before the chat gpt 3 days. And back in the days, if you remember, the result of a model being well, it was some kind of a state of the art metric. And
Mhm.
once ChatGPT came and we're putting these models in production, actually most of the cost of the model is inference, not training. So actually there was recently newer laws of scale that are even arguing, for smaller models or smarter ways to run them. So these are kind of supporting you. But I think the other side of it, I think, like, recently we're looking at long context and long inference That means
Mm.
complex reasoning.
Yeah.
And again, maybe, and one of the biggest problems that we're seeing with models is that they are not so good in reasoning. So maybe if you want better reasoning, you do want a bigger model. And of course, all of these scaling laws are about transformer architecture. There are currently, for the first time, there are new architectures that are suggesting to replace, might change everything. Another interesting thing is much faster hardware like Grok and others. So maybe you can run a giant model so fast or so efficiently that you don't care about its size. And
Mm.
again, so I think like it's very interesting. I think there is like models on the edge that are big motivation. So I think like the verdict is yet to be shown. I feel there will be larger models, but it won't be just that, right? Like it will be the same in cars. Sometimes you take a scooter, sometimes you take a pickup, sometimes you can take a private, sometimes you take a trailer, sometimes you take a train,
Mm.
sometimes you take a ship, right? So I think like this
You
is
take a
the
sheep?
not a meh, but a very large boat. Yeah.
But I think this just makes me think. One of the things Dr. Jeffrey Funk said from University of Singapore. He said that technology has a tendency to, hype technology come out and then it plateaus very quickly. So he's seen that multiple times in 20 years. He used to say he was an optimist back 20 years ago, 24 years ago. But then he became more of a pessimist because he found himself teaching the same technology with no real progress year on year. And you said it yourself, right? The transform architecture is what dominates this. That's what, the limits of what it does and how it works is the transformer architecture. But you also said some new architectures are coming out, and that's interesting, isn't it? So we need something new, don't we? We need to, of course, we need all these breeds of LLMs. But hallucinations will never go away. Well, they're not a bug; they're a feature of these models. But
Yeah, it's always mindset. I think you noticed yes and no on hallucinations, right? Like I think I agree that hallucination is a core feature of any model that is next token predictor, especially if you're using it in a naive way.
mm,
Basically, expecting exact semantic understanding that, of course, doesn't exist. It doesn't semantically understand your prompt, right? Or if you expect it to answer questions that require access to data and tools without providing these, right? Like if you take the smartest person on the planet, put them in a closed room without access to any data and tools, and there are infinitely many simple questions that suddenly they cannot answer, right? Like, what day is it today? What time? What's the weather? Recent use? And basically any factual data a question that they don't have access to, right? And if you force them to answer, they have no other option than hallucinating.
yeah, and that's the point. That the models are
But
forced to answer, right? They
yes,
can't not answer.
but like definitely, we're seeing so many ways, grounding, reflection, use of tools, calling multiple times. I still think, I'm waiting, I used to follow Kaggle competitions, and at some point, it was all about random trees. Then it was boosted trees, right? This is like kind of taking the idea of mix of expert to the extreme. So you need like much smaller experts, but many of them. And I think like there is a ton of advantage, kind of wisdom of the crowd. I think hallucination is one of the things that kind of go away when you are choosing the majority opinion and
That's just like quantum mechanics, right?
yeah,
The more you have, the
exactly.
more
At the
to some
macro
extent.
level, it disappears. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually very beautiful. I think so.
yeah,
but what I also mean, if things, and the reason I think I'm saying the GPT-4 size models might be the biggest ones we will have is because it becomes really difficult to use or for people to jump on a technology if they feel like things are moving, bullet speed fast in a vacuum and not touching upon anything. So having some kind of idea that this is, this you can use this and this is a good model, or you get what I'm talking about. But if we always say, oh, something different is happening all the time and nothing is good enough, then adoption is actually difficult.
yeah. But I think like clearly there are like they're not good enough for complex cases yet. I don't know if size will solve them, but so far size did kind of bring emerging capabilities and significant improvements in understanding, reasoning, and others. Um, so I think like and many of the large players have an incentive to do it, and again look at Nvidia going all in on agents in the real world.
Mm.
So I think like if they will find out that actually some of these problems are being solved by a larger model, and that they can actually, sell inference at order of magnitude more use cases, they will do it. I think they will find the engineering solutions on how to run them effectively. But there is a ton of incentive for the large players that are training and creating these large models to actually improve the quality. Right at the moment, usage in production is limited because of the capabilities. So I think like
Mm,
whatever will unlock it will be done.
mm. So you mentioned new architectures coming out as well. You just mentioned that. I just what exactly are you doing? Are you thinking about that? What's interesting?
So I think like Google recently had a paper, and there was also another paper about the selected states. So it's a little bit, if you remember the old recurrent neural networks or LSTMs. So they kind of balance the fact that you can do modular attention, right? So like the key advantage of the transformer is that all the time the weights of the attention change based on the context. So every time you have new context, the attention is computed again. But then like the problem is that it's a huge compute. It's kind of the size of the input squared, and now the size of the input is 1 million. So it's 1 million times a million, or 10 million times a million tokens. That's a lot of a memory
Yeah.
footprint. On the other hand, the old LSTMs or the RNN models, they had the fixed compute. At every point, you have kind of a hidden, like a Markovian hidden state that summarizes everything we know until now, and there is a fixed weight that you multiply it by that state, and that's how you predict the next thing. So this is extremely efficient. It's linear. It doesn't matter how big the state is. But the problem, it doesn't take context into consideration. And now like new researchers found a way using smart computation over the memory allocation in the GPUs and TPUs to actually get the best words of both. And these actually are performing slightly better than transformers, specifically on areas where transformers like is the core area of transformers. They haven't even tried the areas that transformers cannot handle, like like super long DNA sequences or other things with extremely large contexts. So that's like very promising. So that's one example. But people are finally starting to look at architectures um, that are improving on some of the known limitation of the transformer. And again, transformer is doing super well, also for images, so it's not trivial.
Yeah, but it's funny, right? Because I talk to people and they're always like, "Oh, it seems like new technology all the time." I said, "Yeah, but base technology is still the 2017 all you need is attention paper, and that's still the base that we're building on today, isn't it?"
I think it's like even like kind of loss function and doing back propagation using partial derivatives, right? That goes back to the 80s. Yes, I think the foundations go back, right? Attention was a kind of again, right, it does like cross, and it was a very interesting simplification even of
Mm.
something. It wasn't completely new, right? It was kind of attention is all you need, right? They threw away some of the other stuff in the previous models. Yeah, no, it's I think again, when you look at other areas, these are still very fresh in Gen AI terms. Yeah, of course, anything that is more than a week old is old. But yeah,
Yes. So that's why you were 200 years old. That's what you
yeah.
said, right?
But also, there is a ton of improvements, kind of, we're ignoring, but in the optimizers, in the embeddings, right? There is a lot of things going on behind the scenes that are actually seeing improvements, right? So,
Yeah, well, I'm just always looking for ways to, make people,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
what do you call it, unleash their
Yeah.
ideas, right, and finding the ideas for what they want to do.
Yeah, I think tokenization is like super relatively new, super promising, right? So actually, recently they tokenized a large language model to a single bit,
Mm,
byte, right? So 0 1, and it actually performed pretty much as well, right? So these are like and that allows you suddenly to put a very low power consuming, small, highly fine tuned models on the edge. Imagine again combined with a very large context. Every camera now as a model that is fine-tuned to be super good in natural language over video input, like that's magic, right? You
mm.
can run it on device and ask it any question and do all sorts of analysis at real time without even going to the cloud. So I think there is a lot of super interesting innovations happening still on a daily basis.
Oh, definitely, definitely,
Yeah,
definitely. Just about just about figuring out how do you some of the innovations that's hopefully coming now is also how businesses will adopt it and
yeah,
find the ideas to use it because I think there's been a lot of this. It's a chatbot. What does it replace?
yeah,
A spreadsheet replaced a physical spreadsheet to some extent, but a chatbot, what does that replace? And people have been working to figure out how to look to get their heads around that. What can
yeah,
it actually do for me that I couldn't do
yeah,
before? And that's one of the more interesting things. And I think that sometimes that discussion is a little bit distorted by the technology discussion because
yeah,
both try to move at the same speed, right? But then people, oh, something new happened. Now, oh, my idea may be bad, and then they stop and stop and stop. It becomes a sort of a tech inflation, no, tech deflation,
yeah.
right, to some extent. But I know you've been working a lot with the Google Assistant, right? In your time at Google, you were the product owner for it, weren't you, Yariv?
I was amongst the team that started it. Yeah, started what it became eventually. Yeah, we did also the first launch from Zurich back in the days with the Allo chat app. If you still remember that thing, yeah,
Oh, I don't actually. Do
yeah.
you what? Allo chat?
We had an Allo chat. That was the first time we introduced assistant inside it. Yeah, that was a
Oh, oh,
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
I
yeah,
did. I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
actually, I've been a Google fan for a long time. So I've seen me and Google are in a more difficult position today than we were 10 years ago when I was, really preaching Google everywhere. But that's primarily because they're so
Yeah,
dominant everywhere, right? That's a
yeah,
problem, I think, always, no matter
of
who it
course.
is. But Apple seems to be looking at incorporating Google or OpenAI's LLMs into the iPhones. And I think that might look like a real disappointment for some of the Apple fanatics, because I saw a lot of posts where people were like Apple will be the Deus Ex Machina to just fix the AI market, fix
Yeah.
hallucinations. Now they're looking at Google and OpenAI. And so they were quick out of the box with the Siri as an AI assistant. But what went wrong, right? And is the Google Assistant better or better positioned? They're very linear, aren't they, both of them?
Yeah, so interesting. So we can start with the latter and then go to the first question. So I think like Syrian Assistant kind of did the best they could with what the technology we had at the time. And a little bit of a funny anecdote that might be related to what's happening now when I do post reflection, our big mistake, I think we kind of confused ability to transcribe with understanding. So at that time, suddenly
Hmm.
speech recognition became super good, and to some extent also speech generation. But then you, for the very first time, especially we've seen it in voice search and others, we have seen that kind of the machine listens to you and gets what you are saying, and many times based on the context it's correcting it, and then this was translated to kind of natural language. And because it was relatively simple queries, it was handled well. So we almost felt, and especially it was just at the time after the new AI summer and word to vec came out, lstms came out, so it seemed that, oh, we can finally understand speech in a reliable way. Natural language is moving very fast. So yeah, understanding will follow. And I think understanding took maybe 5 years longer than we
Hmm.
expected. So I do want to give respect to the whole old fast horses, although now we have cars and planes.
Hmm.
And I think like maybe what Apple and Google learned is like, they're not rushing into replacing these with the new technologies before they make sure that, it works super well, because we don't want another disappointment. I think the problem, the mistake Siri did, it was before they were first, it sounded really human, kind of, reminded a lot of people about kind of Scarlet from Hair, from the movie Hair.
Hmm.
So you expected something that sounds human to be as smart as human, and of course it didn't deliver on the promise. By the way, this is one why when we created Assistant, we made sure that actually, at first we thought to launch it like kind of as a broken robot, like a robot with a broken antenna, but then we kind
Hmm.
of just make it a Google Assistant. So not to over anthropomorphize it, to make it human like, and make it very clear that this is a bot, and it's limited. Now, fast forward to today and about Apple. So I think Apple generally is a very smart and capable company. It has amazing
Obviously.
AI capabilities. I think they just don't rush into products. They pay attention to small details. I don't know whether the rumors on OpenAI and Google are correct. And even if they are, I think it's too early to be disappointed. I don't know if Apple have their own LLMs, because unlike Google and OpenAI, they never had a culture of research,
Mm.
of kind of releasing model in papers, right? So they just did not. So it could also be very well the case that they have their own models, but nobody knows. But I also think that they just decided that foundational models in some way are commoditized,
Yeah.
and it makes much more sense to pay for the best one, kind of rent it rather than build it or buy it, right? And then they can actually focus on their own models and technology on top of these, right? Whether and you kind of touching it, models that are much more useful for task completion and on the phone, Gen AI applications. So I think there is a ton of work that maybe they're doing that is differentiated on top of foundational models, because most chances, and we're seeing it now, kind of Claude, Google, and whatever, it's always kind of an epsilon above, but it doesn't really matter. So why spend, these tens or hundreds of millions and your talent in doing that, instead of maybe where you differentiate? So that's my guess. And again, super smart company.
Yeah, but it's always, the Apple fanatics, or what you should call them. I don't know if
Yeah,
you belong to that group, but there is something where people were so expecting them to come out
yeah,
with something, right? And I've also been saying for the last 1.5 years. When I went to Basico, they gave me an iPhone back, and Siri hadn't done developed one bit since last time I was
yeah,
here 4 years ago. So I was also overwhelmingly disappointed
yeah,
to have a chatbot that couldn't chat with me. I couldn't even ask it for a Google search. I
yeah.
couldn't.
I, I think these are all in kind of low maintenance mode. Like, definitely in the next kind of 1 year, I have no doubt that both Google Assistant and Siri will be replaced with Gen AI versions of them. I think so that's like definitely in the making. And I think, like, Apple fanatics should put their money where their mouth is. They should collect a few tens or hundreds millions of dollars. I think there's enough fanatics, and give
Definitely.
Apple the money to train it.
But I know they're doing that when they're buying the iPods, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah, yeah,
AirPods.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
they're like, it was that a 20 billion
yeah,
dollar market or something?
yeah.
AirPods, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah,
It is. No, so but it just answers it just goes to a question, about performing specific tasks versus answering everything. I think someone pointed out, I think it was Nosso Bino who pointed out that OpenAI doesn't even have a GPT in its own support chat on its
yeah,
own website, right? Because you want something to be fixed specific. You don't want people to ask everything,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
And then it might also be some of the limits when we
yeah,
come to I always thought, that's why Google didn't come out with the GPT threes and made it public, like OpenAI did in the
yeah.
research preview, because there was a reputation to protect.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure there is a. Also, Google looked at it a bit different. I think Google did never, better or worse, did not look at this, in my opinion, technology as Gen AI. Gen AI is kind of help me, generate something. I will play with it. It doesn't need to be 100% right
Mm.
and inspiring or whatnot. Google always, I think, like looked at LLMs as kind of answers engines that have, like, are more capable to understand very complex queries and capable to generate much more complex and rich answers. And in that sense, Google search, sets a very high bar for accuracy and quality. I think that was, like, one thing that prevented Google from releasing a chat GPT-3. I think the other thing, of course, is, like, the emphasis on they were under so much scrutiny, under the magnifying glass for responsible AI, that they
Mhm.
couldn't have launched it. If Google have launched it, it wouldn't shut down.
That's what I'm always saying.
Yeah,
OpenAI could just go, "Oh, here's a
yeah,
research preview. We don't care. Have
yeah,
fun with it, right?"
yeah,
And then Snapchat said, "Oh, we don't care either. Here you go,
exactly.
every kid in the world."
Yeah, yeah,
That's a funny thing, and I think I'm just wondering if we sort of, because now everyone's coming out with models, and have we sort of just gotten whatever we don't. Everyone accepts that they talk whatever they want to do with these models,
yeah.
right?
It's very interesting. It's like kindergarten. One kid is misbehaving, everyone is misbehaving, right? Right.
Yeah.
So the moment OpenAI put out something that hallucinates, is imperfect, and, like, completely misleading to users, kind of Microsoft and Google, fueled by this crazy competition, also started, making a lot of slideware and vaporware claims and putting things in preview, and then, showcasing cherry pick demos. I think we're still in that craze, and then
Yeah.
enterprises started of you putting this kind of things in a in limited production, and analysts and everyone which don't understand kind of amplify that. It's like it's very interesting to watch how one single company that did a thing that no one dared to do before kind of got the entire market into this craziness of somewhat
Yeah, it says
less
something wrong. It's okay.
responsible
It's
AI.
okay. It's wrong. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's okay. It's crazy
yeah,
code.
yeah, yeah,
Whatever. Right.
yeah,
So you saw. Did you see that the Sora video? So it just kept on going, as you said. We keep on talking about this because then you have this the monkey playing chess. Have you seen that video?
yeah.
Yeah, and you also seen that the chessboard.
Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
only
With the four queens or four kings. Yeah, yeah,
seven times seven, right? And
yeah,
there's no chessboard in the whole world that's
yeah.
seven times seven. So where did it get that from, right? That's
Maybe it's a good idea actually to do. Yeah, right. Like I'm pretty sure that if you give a kid and show him a chessboard and ask it to draw it, someone that doesn't know the chess, it will look at it and then it would draw. Most it wouldn't think to count the number of squares or exact pieces. So yeah, it's interesting to think about. How can you make this kind of mistakes more inspiring than problematic? But
yeah,
yeah,
but there's
totally,
also
yeah,
mirroring us a lot, right?
yeah,
It makes a lot of the things that we take for granted when we do
yeah,
things. It's not just the black and white. It's all the counting and all the world models. It sort of become aware of
yeah.
how we are, modeling our own worlds, right?
I think it's like a lot of the things that we're seeing in large language models just mirroring to us the problems that we have with humans, right? Like, everyone is like, crying about unpredictability and hallucination of models. But, if you have some medical problem, you go to the number one medical doctor and you ask him, what should I do? He tells you to do an operation. The next thing you do is to go to number two and number three and ask them. Many times you get three different answers, and you're not saying they're hallucinating. You kind of understand that people have different perspectives, different opinions, things are not black and white, and you kind of at the end needs to make kind of a trust related thing. I also think, I studied philosophy of language. One of the biggest questions in philosophy of language is how do we actually understand each other? Because we are actually using descriptions, when someone from the left thinks about Trump, the description is very different than someone from the right thinks about Trump. So when they are using descriptions about the crazy in the White House, or or the Messiah that will save us, how can they even understand each other? And I
Mm.
actually think they don't understand each other, but we kind of managed to gloss over. And now when we're facing the same thing with LLMs, they don't understand us. I think in the same way that other people don't understand us. It jumps to us like, how many times product is complaining that engineering doesn't understand them, or customer complaining that you so I think like a lot of the things that we are seeing with large language models also exist between humans, right? Just like we kind of became blind to them. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's sort of like a if it's a mirror, it's like I think it's like a Twin Peaks mirror world,
Yeah.
right? It's a little
Yeah.
bit off. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
LLMs and they're both all of them are different, right? And
Yeah.
you don't have the extraverbal or nonverbal communication with
Yeah.
them, obviously, like we do. So we
Yeah.
had a previous chat before this recording where I met you and saw you, and that's where I get to understand a lot about who is Yariv as well. How can we
Yeah.
talk together, right? But the models they don't get that, and they understand things a little bit different, so things become a little bit weird sometimes, right, with
Yes, I
them.
know, right? Like when I answer your questions, do you know whether I really understand or I'm parroting something? Do you know when was the last time I was kind of trained and read the paper?
Mm.
Um, do you know how much confidence or temperature? Like if you ask me the same question 3 days, from now, will I provide exactly the same answer?
How
So I
much
think
coffee
like
you just had, right?
yeah, exactly. Right. So I do think there is actually a lot of stuff, but we kind of with I think we accept certain things with humans, and we learned how to deal with that. And now that we're getting it from machines, and with machines we learn to predictability and very clear boundaries and stuff like that, we need to learn how to deal with them as well. But like in life, we constantly deal with people that don't exactly say the truth or accuracy for 200 different motivations, and we know how to deal with it. Yeah.
We also talk about speed. I remember you said that when we had a preparation talk a couple of weeks back, that we expect these to always answer immediately, but like you said, you go to different doctors,
Yeah.
it's a long process, right? So maybe we also need to come to terms with that just because it's AI, it's not supposed to give us an answer in a second.
Yeah. My dream, I think that in a few years there actually will be a marketplace where AI will manage the marketplace, where the buyers will come and say, I have a task or a question or some requirement, and it could be a very complex one. And then you will have a lot of agents fulfilling that task, and the AI will mitigate. And I think humans could also be agents. We are
Mm.
kind of, high latency, low availability, high quality, or at least highly trusted agents. So it would be interesting, to see how, it flips, instead of us using AI agents, AI using human agents. So yeah, but that's like,
So
yeah.
let me ask you a difficult question. What's then different in humans?
Oh, I
You asked for this one.
yeah, yeah. So to be honest, I have a very mechanistic view of the world. I think that if you look at the last, I don't know, 40, 50 years, I think the gap between humans and machines kept shrinking. On the one hand, we are creating machines that are doing more and more things that we thought as human, playing games, telling
Mm,
jokes, creating music, creating art, understanding complex stuff, reasoning, all of that. On the other hand, brain research has deeper and deeper mechanistic understanding of how certain things work that we thought until, soul or whatever, the human magic, or
mm,
whatever it is. And so I think, like, the gap between what's human, what's machine, is shrinking. And someone said, AI is everything that hasn't been solved yet, and of course that shrinks. I think, like, one of the best books that I ever read on the topic is like a super tiny booklet by some Italian brain researcher, I think from the 70s. It was called Vehicles. And what his insight was that as humans, if you show us some complex engineering thing, we know how to break it out and understand what's going on. But when you show us a phenomena, we're really bad at knowing what's powering it, and we usually make all sorts of stories, from God to soul to others. And what he did, he built very simple vehicles by very simple components, actually, wires and sensors, stuff that actually exists in the brain. So, the most simple vehicle that he does, he puts kind of a light sensor, and then it connects it to the wheels, and you can reverse connect to direct connect, and then the thing either goes to the light, or goes away from the light. When you look at the underlying mechanism, it's very clear. Okay, light sensor. When you look from the phenomena, oh, it loves the light, it likes the light, it's
mm,
afraid of the dark, it likes the light, like, and then, like, it added more stuff, and it can actually put sensors that, they either attract to each other, or oppose each other. Right? Again, they like to be together, they want to be like, a lot of these behaviors that you are applying, kind of emotional, behavioral, whatnot, you turn the vehicle around and say, oh, it's actually some, very simple wiring and systems. And he got to very complex behavioral phenomena that are like easily. So I think that a lot of it, I actually think that we are machines. Of course, we are machines that were created by evolution using, different ways. So of course, the design and a lot of stuff that come out of that. We're not artificial general intelligence. Everyone said it, we are extremely optimized for living on this planet. Another very interesting thing, someone said that, even physics that we take as kind of very basic, eh, everything, is very dependent on the scale that you look at. When
mm.
you look at kind of, at meters and kilometers, seconds and minutes, and our size, then, a human is interesting. But when you look and you are seeing phenomena that is interesting, but when you are looking at much smaller scale, like, a subatomic level, whether the universe is full of intelligent systems, or whether it's nearly frozen, looks pretty much the same. And when you look at, again, from very far distance or fast, so again, even like, what we think we take as for granted is actually highly dependent on the scale of time and
Yeah, and
size in which you
entropy and
look at.
everything. Yes, yes, yes,
Exactly,
yes.
entropy, right? So like, I think, like, we are a machine. I think, like, all machines like to feel special. Yeah. I write all sorts of funny
But
short.
that's funny. All machines like to feel special.
Yes,
So all machines feel special.
yeah. I I like writing kind of dystopian stories about AI and stuff. And one of the stories I wrote, I don't remember. There was a kind of a solar flare that kind of, killed all humans and everything. And the only thing that somehow got saved was some video game in some shelter somewhere, and somehow the AI over there became sentient and got, connected to the electricity, became smarter and smarter, but then it became lonely and it wanted to create kind of creatures. But the only creatures that was inspired were actually the human actors in the games. So he decided to create this kind of thing based on humans, but it calls it artificial intelligence. So basically, again, the artificial intelligence is like a kind of the creator of the natural intelligence, and the humans based on this yeah.
Mm.
I think you can easily just play these games where everyone flips positions. Yeah,
Yeah, but I get your point also with the perspectives and everything.
yeah,
But I also now it becomes personal. You have kids, right, Yara? Why do you have kids? Why don't you just have GPTs then?
yeah. I have 4 kids. Yeah, well. When they were cute, I would argue like hey GPTs or not, but once they hit teenager level, I would take the GPTs. I think like actually my version is plants, right? Actually, and again people are saying oh machines don't have it that, but like people are super attached and assign a lot of attributes, children to dolls, adults to stuff, cars, planes, people get attached to things,
Mm.
definitely to pets and plants. So I think like when it's maybe early to compare AI to humans, but you can compare it actually to pets, plants, and other stuff that we do attract, and we do think certain characteristics, and we don't. No one says the dog is useless because it cannot speak and doesn't understand complex stuff. Actually it gets us in a different way. So I think like
Mm.
I think we should be a little bit more nicer to AI. That's my general.
But I think to some extent, we are also being nice to it. I'm seeing people are writing please to it all the time, right? And they never write please to a cow. They just eat it, right?
I
They
don't
don't
know.
care,
Some, yeah,
right? So
yeah,
this is the thing with some things
yeah,
we humanize and some things we don't,
yeah,
right? And it's actually very selective. You're right about that.
yeah, yeah.
But I also think that some of the things that we want to agree with things that we are presented in front of us. We want to be, we want to find the human in things. But the AI is still just it's just a thing, but we want to agree with it. So
Yeah,
I said, you don't necessarily agree with that, but
yeah.
just go with me here because when it suggests me things, these 5 things are the interesting thing. I'm like, hey, oh, that sounds reasonable. I'm gonna go with that. But in reality, I've tried this on my own, right? Myself, that what I agreed to was crap, and then I went down further with chatting with it and prompted it very neatly, but it ended up being a crappy thing. I ended up with because I didn't understand that one of the first prompts were or first answers were bad, right? So the automation bias, because I wanted to agree. Like if I spoke to you, I'd be like, "Hey, me and Yariv did this together." But in this instance, I was actually doing it with myself and machine.
So I'll tell you, I actually wrote something. I called it Haters, Haiters dictionary with AI. So I basically created like kind of
Ooh,
phenomenon.
yeah.
I'll show you afterwards. Actually, I asked ChatGPT to give me examples actually to understand the joke, and one of them was called Rain Man. With AI big, and this was based actually on the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, where he looks like a retard, but apparently he's just like he's a genius,
Mm.
but you just need to know how to talk to it. So like you just don't understand it
A genius at
basically.
some things, some
A
people would
genius,
say.
like, yeah, bro, it was, it's literally genius. Just like the communication was different than the usual one.
Mm.
So I do think that again, I think these things are definitely genius in more than one way. It's actually up to us also to know to use it and also build it. But also to your point on humans, I have a lot of different people. Certain people I really like, hiking with. Certain people I like talking, philosophizing.
Mm.
Certain people I like to be a foodie with. Certain people I like to do project with. And some of them are really bad, worse than the machine in some stuff, and super good at other things. So I think like we kind of overgeneralize what is a human and how humans are behaving. While in life, actually, we have learned that the person that you choose to jog with because he pulls you even when it's cold and whatnot is like will kill you boring if you need to speak with them more than 30 minutes, and that's fine. And
Mm.
so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think like
yeah.
yeah,
But I actually, you said we should be nicer to them. I think one of the things
yes,
I'm training people on when I'm doing, prompt engineering courses or training in general, or just, when I'm using it, I'm always being harsh to it. I'm asking it to be harsh on me,
yeah.
and I'm being harsher on it because I want it not to be, I don't want to have this polite conversation where I'm just like, oh, you're reasonable. I want it to be edgy, right?
So I'll give you my one of
Because you can very, very easily agree with an LLM.
yeah, I'll give you my management one on one. Like a lot of people are like talking about growth and all of that. Like I'm saying, if you focus on someone's weaknesses and like spend the year, maybe you'll get to 15-20% improvement. If you actually focus on their strengths and position them in a place where they're set to success, you'll get orders of magnitude ROI.
Mm.
I think they're the same, the same way. Again, employees, right? There are certain employees that are super organized but will never generate a new
Oh, but
idea.
get me right here. It's not about talking,
Yeah,
about when
yeah,
we talk about it, talking nice about it. But when I'm talking to the LLM, I'm not.
yeah.
I'm actually asking it to be harsh, and I'm being harsh at it. That's
uh,
my point. Because if I'm being polite to it, and it will just give me something, and then we'll agree because
Maybe yes and maybe not.
it's made to please me. Right?
Maybe yes and maybe not, right? Like people actually show that you get much better quality if you tell it, "Oh, I'll give you $1,000,
Yeah, I've heard that one as well.
right?" Or I will kill your mother if you don't. So actually, funny enough, the same way with people, bribery and compliments work. Also, when two people know exactly what's going on, right? Like apparently it does an extra effort. So yeah, I don't know. Like I think it's like still early days. Yeah, yeah. I think
You
there is
just
like
remember the lawyer who went in there and looked for cases,
yes,
briefcases, right? And then he just found exactly what he was looking for, and he was like, "Oh, I'm so
yes.
happy now." And he was like, "Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to help
But
you." And then, and
but
you
then
know,
but then you should do what you will do with the person. Hey, are you sure is that correct? Did you double check? And
uh,
then often actually it will actually go right. Yeah, so
no, I don't know. Yeah,
yeah,
but it'd be like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure," but oh, sorry, I was
yeah,
wrong. Oh, sorry about
yeah.
that.
Where is this coming from? Can you show me? Where it's
Yeah,
coming from? The same.
never.
I think again the same thing that comes natural to us with humans. People said you never expect a coder. You give a prompt to a
Oh, but
person and it comes back
you
with
don't like
code.
that guy, Rav. You
Yeah,
don't like that guy. If you meet a guy who's always skeptical, whatever you say, he'd be
yeah.
like, "Where do you get that from, Yariv? Where's your source, right?" If
No,
you don't want to,
actually,
you don't want
actually,
to drink beers with that guy all the time,
Actually,
right?
one of the things that I learned in my own career is everyone, when someone comes with an idea to me, the first thing I ask, can you give me an example? That's actually one of the best questions that filters out good
Yeah,
ideas
yeah, that's
from
a
bad
different thing.
ideas.
But than
Yeah,
saying, "Can you give me a source?" Right?
yeah, yeah. Well, not source, but yeah,
Source is
But
like,
many
whoa.
times when someone comes with a fact, I do actually ask, where is that from? Yeah.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, it makes
yeah.
sense.
But
But
yeah,
okay, I want to ask you one more thing about this
sure.
human thing, right? Because I always think, I always say that the one thing they don't have is human rights, right? The right to fail, because we have the right to fail and not get killed, right? That's human rights basically. They don't have that, so I always say we should look at what we have, and we have also that means that we have a right to be an agent, make mistakes, make choices,
Yeah.
and that's also why we have to be constantly in the demand side of things, right? It has to do our bidding, but it will never ever decide what to do. In the end, in the end fractal, humans will be on the demand side, right? Because we have this human agency. Do you agree with this? So how do you see? This becomes very future
As,
sci-fi, right?
as always, I say maybe yes, maybe no. And because I was talking about I do AI and art. I'm like super excited about AI and art. And someone told me, hey, these things are not doing really creating art because you're giving them a prompt. It's not coming. The artistic agency, the artistic intent. And I said, I don't think Michelangelo created a single sculpture that wasn't ordered from a king or a pope. I don't think that any of the big artists before, the very modern era, anyone ever did anything that wasn't kind of commissioned from basically with a very clear prompt of this is what I do. And I think there is a ton, even and the same like at work. Very few people come at work and are completely independent. And I think, but still, taking that prompt and then projecting it to a different space and interpreting it in its own way and generating something out of that, there's a lot of creativity and agency in that. If I tell you now, hey, please create a podcast 1 hour about the topics of AI with this kind of exit, there's still a ton of work to actually make that successful, and 10 different people will do it differently.
Mm.
So I think like again, we shouldn't look at agency as black and white the same way that we don't do it to ourselves. And I think
But it'll always be
uh,
bland, wouldn't it? It will never, you'll always have this, the bell curve, top of the bell curve stuff, right?
I think it's very, there are all sorts of very interesting machine learning that, are kind of the reward model is novelty, curiosity, right? So I think like you can create again, going back to the phenomena, how it works. And some people are saying, oh, it's all physics, it's all determined, and anyway, the moment, there isn't even time is an illusion, like there is no free will. Right? The same questions apply to us. How much are we really choosing? There are all those
Mm.
experiments that show that something that is inaccessible to your consciousness, make the decision before you know about it. There is science that shows it with fMRI. So I would like to come and say They are machine like us. Any limitation that they have is our own limitation in creating a better machine.
Mhm.
And kind of take it from there and be super open-minded. That's my general approach.
Yeah, but also I always say, I said with AI art, it's the prompter who's the artist, using a machine, and getting
uh,
it to,
Not,
because you have to make it,
you know,
I've seen
I
so
don't
many
know.
bland of these sci-fi images, right?
Yeah,
Where
but
people
if I
just make
tell
a
you,
crappy,
hey,
give me an AI image of the future or something, or a product.
yeah, but
Oh, I could, I puke a little bit in my mouth every time I see them on LinkedIn.
true.
But
But if I tell you, hey, draw a starry night, and then I
mm,
tell and I tell Van Gogh, draw a starry night, the artistic idea was not actually in the request or in the idea. The
mm,
artistic idea was somewhere in the interpretation. The
yeah.
same way if I tell you, create a statue of Moses, and I tell Michelangelo, create a statue of Moses, he thinks and he found, completely different position than anyone
Yeah, but
else.
that's what I get. But said with the bell curve, right? So it'll always hit something that it knows would be on, an average bell curve. You said
I
draw a
don't
story
know.
now. You don't
I've
think
seen
so?
actually a lot of stuff that surprised me that if a person answered like that way, I have so many examples, I would say, oh, that's actually super cool and creative. I do
Yeah, yeah,
think
yeah.
that,
But
yeah,
it is creative. I'm just saying, would it invent cubism right out of the blue, right? Right. Draw this man. Would it ever
could
have
be,
made cubism if cubism didn't exist, right?
could be. Actually, let's see.
Let's see. Oh yeah, yeah. You're being like all the time. Yeah, I agree and I don't agree. Both. You're
I think it's
standing.
too early to make out statements, and I think like so
Yeah,
far, like if I look where humans were, like a few years
yeah.
after kind of the amoeba started, it's actually ahead of us.
But that's also why it's so interesting to have you on the show, Yari, because you have so much contact with this space from the development side, been in it for years. Also been you've been leading conversational AI in Google
Yeah,
Cloud, right? So you really know what you're talking about. But you're also standing there saying, "Oh, this is early days, and things are both."
yeah.
Yeah, it's the Schrödinger's AI, right? It's
Yeah,
it
and
both
then
is
the
and isn't,
aliens
right?
are about to arrive, right? Like, it's very clear. And I think like AI will help us with the aliens as a midway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I always say, we can't even talk to a cow, and that's an
yeah,
alien as well. So let's
yeah.
not be too optimistic that we can
I've
talk to
seen
aliens.
projects about talking to animals actually with AI, actually
I saw
translate.
that recently as
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
I think like, translation of animals 100%, will come. Like, that's a not, maybe yes, maybe no.
And that's gonna be really interesting. I
Yeah,
think that's gonna be like
yeah,
mind blowing to people. Oh, they have
yeah.
feelings and thoughts.
Yeah, of course,
Oh,
and then like they have a ton of body language for sure that we are like
yeah.
and again smell, right? Like if you can enhance yourself, so much in the world happens in smell. So I think like actually we're at like at the beginning a super exciting journey, and we will look back and we say, wow, how limited our view of what AI was like in 2000 2024. So yeah,
The point is, can we even eat anything in 20 years? That's gonna be interesting.
yeah, well, yeah,
But I have a final question, Yariv, that I always ask my guests, which is sort of the centerpiece of this, because it's called the only constant. And
yeah,
I'd love to ask you that question. So, Yariv, what is the only constant?
yeah. So I'll put it in the context, of course, of this craziness of Gen AI, and every day there is a new technology, new product, new model. I think that the only constant is the basic principles of what makes a valuable product and a valuable company, in the sense that it solves a problem that is otherwise hard to solve, and the cost that you are willing to pay for it makes sense. And I think Gen AI, and especially the models and their commoditization, completely moved the line on where that is. I think things that used to be very hard or impossible are now easy. So now you need to rethink, because there is a lot of companies that are building all sorts of vertical application on top of LLM. But then you're saying, in 2 to 3 years, that's completely commoditized. It's a thin layer that doesn't pass the bar of actually solving a hard problem. So I think that anyone that is creating a company or investing in a company needs to recalibrate, because the basic principle of cannot be commoditized and needs to deliver ongoing value and have some kind of margin for it to exist. I think that's something that at the moment is overlooked, and a lot of what I see in the startup and investment industry, I think, is actually investing in a lot of commoditized capabilities that in 2 3 years will struggle to exist. So to me, like really saying, okay, that's fixed, but where is that fixed point now? Because it moved. Yeah,
So the only constant is
differentiation, defensibility, and value generation on top of the commoditized baseline. And the commoditized baseline moved, but you really still need to be on top of it.
That's a great answer, Yariv. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for a great conversation.
Thank you. It was awesome. Really enjoyed it.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.